In the distant past, Super Craft Bros was one of the most popular Minecraft minigames ever, for a while being the most popular. This success wouldn't really last all that long though before the game completely fell off and was effectively in limbo for years before getting shut down. Before I get into the main topic though, if this game ends up interesting you, there is a revival server called Nexly that hosts a recreation of the game, but more on that later. So what is Super Craft Bros? As you might have imagined, the mode was based on Super Smash Bros. By Nintendo. Super Craft Bros. Started off as a map made by Sethbling. Players were able to play on one of 6 maps, and were able to choose one of 8 classes representing a specific mob in Minecraft, or a cactus. These 8 were represented by kits that players were able to PvP with. It was a fairly simple idea, but a lot of people liked this mode. So much so, that it would eventually get reworked into a proper, full-on minigame, and brought onto a server, the server being Minecade. Minecade completely revamped what the game was. Not only were there more maps and more classes, but the classes themselves work differently now. Since it was on a server, you had plugins to make these a lot more dynamic, and you were able to introduce completely new mechanics. The most iconic mechanic to come out of being brought to a server was double jump. Once in the air, you were able to double tap your spacebar to gain a few blocks of height, effectively adding a third dimension to PvP. This immediately makes the game one of the most unique PvP experiences in all of Minecraft. The classes also added a lot to the game, and like Smash, were based on various different parts of Minecraft. Generally mobs, but could also be other things like blocks. Though eventually we get some original stuff, like Summoner or Elf, that had nothing to do with anything, but existed anyway. These classes often used plugins to make them do a lot of things that you just were not able to do in vanilla Minecraft, and back in 2013 that really did set it apart from most other minigames. The maps also had to be designed in a special way to accommodate this different style of PvP, often featuring large sections of void, and areas that you could only get to by double jumping. Again, making for a completely unique experience. Also in-game, items would drop. Just like in Smash, getting a good item could completely change the game. Now, this is an extremely basic overview of what the game actually is, but going over the game itself isn't really the point of this video, although if enough people are interested, maybe I could do that at some point in the future. Just with this basic overview though, I think it's easy to see why this game was so popular. It was unlike anything else, which was especially noteworthy for the time. The game was massively popular, peaking around late 2013 to early 2014. However, throughout 2014 the game would see a massive decline in players and would be a shell of its former self. And subsequent years wouldn't be much better, seeing the game go from having a niche but dedicated fanbase to being very, very small, with only the most dedicated players still caring about it. So what happened? Now, there's 4 major parts to talk about here, and the first is extremely simple and the main reason why the game eventually died off, that being a lack of updates. Throughout 2013, updates were released very frequently. You typically wouldn't have to wait more than 3 months to get a massive new update to the game. This would continue into early 2014, getting another update in February 2014, plus a moderate-sized one in April, but after this, we had some problems. There was a promise of a summer update happening. Everyone was excited for it. However, summer came and went and there was nothing. People thought that maybe we'd get something in September, and while we did, it was a very small update with only a couple classes, and that was it. This wasn't the summer update, and definitely wasn't the update that people were promised. Throughout late 2014, there'd be a couple more classes added to the game, but there still wasn't any kind of large-scale update. The next time the game would see something like that was in March 2015, with the Limitless update, but again, it wasn't the large-scale update that people were hoping for, even if it did add some decent stuff. By this point, the game still had a fairly active player base. Nowhere close to what it once was, but for a minigame that had been around for over 2 years at this point, and having gone about a year without a major update, this wasn't too bad. Though what we didn't know at the time is that this would be our last major update to the game. Shifting gears into the second issue, lag. Starting around late 2013 with the Christmas update, the server would experience more lag than usual. For a lot of people, this would persist for quite a few months. One solution was to add server restarts. Every so often, the server would have to restart. Now, there were multiple dedicated servers to Super Craft Bros, so you could switch servers, or just go back to Minecade's lobby, but it was kind of an annoying feature. So between lag issues and server restarts, combined with a stagnant game, problems are starting to add up. Which brings me to the third issue, the balance update. A lot of noteworthy community members back in 2015 wanted to see the game get a balance update. They felt as if a lot of classes were too overpowered and needed to be nerfed. The owner seemed to agree and opted to make a balance team. Over the next couple months, the owner, devs, and some of these players would work together to try and balance the game. And this would go horribly wrong. The balance team would end up pushing a bit too far, trying to restructure the game too much. It's hard to put blame on them, as most of them were just high school kids. And in this situation, it'd be up to the server owner to be an adult and take control of the situation, but instead, well, he seemed to reflect their maturity, and for certain things was completely unwilling to compromise or be reasoned with, causing a massive rift in the team. Eventually, some of these players would take to the forums, explaining the situation, in which the owner would respond by denying their involvement, deeming them to be trolls, which would prompt many of these players to leave the game, and further lowering the player count. However, this issue wasn't done. See, the balance update actually would release in February of 2016, but what we got was a bastardized version of the original concept. Certain nerfs were pushed through, but others weren't, meaning that some overpowered classes were left untouched while others were completely gutted. As you might imagine, this completely screwed with the balance of the game. Furthermore, the game itself was gutted. Many maps, some of which being very popular, were removed from the game, and we were only given one new one as consolation. We were given a few new items, but we also had a few taken away. The lobby we had was also changed, going from something very iconic and unique to something kind of generic looking. Worst of all, we lost about a quarter of the classes in the game, losing 14 of them in one update. I don't know many games that opt to remove entire classes. At worst, maybe it's one or two that are really problematic, but removing 14 in one update was psychotic. We were promised that some of these removals were only temporary, and that they would be reworked and brought back. While others wouldn't return, new classes would eventually come out and take their place. This never happened. A few months later in June, we would get one more old map back, and the lobby would be reverted, which was nice, but that was really it. Anything after this was extremely small. The game wouldn't receive more updates. This brings me to my fourth and final issue, good gaming. Announced at the very start of 2018, it was stated that Minecade and Good Gaming would be partnering up. Initially, this sounded like great news. Having more people on board probably meant more stuff for Minecade, including Super Craft Bros, but we couldn't have been more wrong. After releasing a Battle Royale mode and having it flop, Good Gaming kinda stopped caring about Minecade entirely. There were some pushes by the staff team to try and get an update out, but these fell through entirely. This led to a mass resignation. All of the non-Good Gaming related Minecade staff members resigned at once in December of 2018, and that was that. After this, the game would go dormant for a few months, and Minecade as a whole was shut down on June 30th, 2019. And I have to comment that this was an incredibly stupid decision. See, around June 2019, Minecraft saw a massive resurgence in popularity. People probably would have flocked back to the server, remembering the games they used to play on here, and while it probably wouldn't have been huge, building a niche audience back up was certainly possible. This is especially the case going into 2020 with the pandemic. Had Minecade been online, Super Craft Bros probably would have saw more traffic, but instead of just leaving the server up, even without any updates, they just left it offline. The shutdown itself wasn't supposed to be a shutdown, it was said to be a recode, and that the server would be brought back up in an improved state in about 2 to 3 months. But as I mentioned, the pandemic came and went. The server was nowhere to be found. Now, eventually Super Craft Bros would come back up in an attempted Minecade revival in March of 2023, but this would go horribly. The game felt nothing like Super Craft Bros, and was just very poorly designed in general. I think this screenshot just says everything you really need to know. The extremely small number of players who wanted to check this out left after a day after seeing the quality, and within a few months, the server is back to being offline, and there's been nothing ever since. So, Minecade, and by extension, Super Craft Bros, is likely gone forever. Well, kind of. As I mentioned at the start of the video, there is a server called Nexly. This hosts a game called Super Smash Blocks, a revived and recreated version of Super Craft Bros. The idea is to take what the original game had to offer and expand upon it, as if it actually continued to receive updates, which has led to massively overhauled maps, many reworked classes, and just a lot of quality of life changes in general. Being a recreation of a game that saw its peak popularity about 12 years ago, yeah, the player count isn't great, but groups of people still get online to this day to play the game, which says a lot about the game's quality. If the brief overview of the game sounded interesting, or more likely you're someone who remembers the game from many years ago, I would highly suggest checking it out. And if there's no one on, you could go into the Discord and see if anyone wants to play games, and you'll probably find some participants. Super Craft Bros and Minecade as a whole might be gone, but they've certainly left a legacy, and even if it's been a while, I imagine a lot of people still remember this game. Again, for a while this was the most popular Minecraft minigame ever. The main reason why I'm making this video is to try and spread the word, to see if anyone remembers, and hopefully some people do, and maybe check out the revival server to rebuild a larger community. Odds of that happening might be slim, but who knows. And with that, thanks for watching, and bye-bye.